This video explores the truth about British pubs in the 1950s. If this brings back memories, please let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more nostalgic journeys through British history. The truth about British pubs in the 1950s Part 1. When you pushed open the door of a British pub in the 1950s, you stepped into a different world entirely. The heavy wooden door swung shut behind you and the smell hit you first. Cigarette smoke hung thick in the air, mixing with the sweet scent of beer and the faint aroma of sawdust on the floor. This is post-war Britain, and the pub was more than just a place to drink. It was the beating heart of the community, where men gathered after a long day at the factory or the docks. Women, though, well, they had their own designated spaces. You see, most pubs still maintained strict Victorian traditions that kept the sexes largely separate. Walk into any typical pub in 1952 and you'd find yourself in the public bar. This was the working man's domain, with bare wooden benches and simple furnishings. A pint of bitter would cost you 1 shilling and 3p, which might seem cheap, but remember the average weekly wage was only around £7. The saloon bar was altogether different. Here you'd find upholstered seats, carpet on the floor, and prices that were 2p high per pint. This was where the lower middle classes gathered, the clerks and shopkeepers, keeping themselves just that bit separate from the manual workers next door. If a woman wanted to drink, she'd often be directed to the snag. This tiny room, sometimes barely bigger than a cupboard, offered privacy and respectability. Many landlords simply refused to serve women in the public bar at all. They'd stand firm, arms crossed, and tell you it wasn't proper. The drinks themselves would surprise modern pubgoers. Lager was almost unheard of in British pubs during the 1950s. You'd be hard-pressed to find a single lager pump in most establishments. Instead, bitter reigned supreme, served at cellar temperature, never chilled. Watney's Red Barrel became increasingly common, though traditional drinkers viewed it with deep suspicion. Mild ale actually outsold bitter throughout much of the decade. This sweeter, less hoppy beer was cheaper still, at around £1 per pint. Workers would down several pints of mild after their shift, as it was weaker than bitter and you could drink more of it. By 1959, Britons were drinking more mild than any other type of beer. The pub itself looked completely different from today's establishments. Dark wood paneling covered the walls, stained brown from decades of tobacco smoke. Frosted glass windows prevented passers-by from looking in, maintaining the pub's private, almost secretive atmosphere. You couldn't see out, and nobody could see in. Behind the bar, the landlord or landlady ruled their domain with absolute authority. They knew every regular by name, every drinking habit, every family trouble. The publican of the 1950s was part social worker, part confessor, part community leader. They extend credit to trusted customers, cash workers' wage packets, and settle disputes before they turned nasty. Opening hours were strictly controlled by licensing laws that dated back to the First World War. Pubs opened from 11 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, then closed for the afternoon session. They'd reopen at 5:30 and serve until 10:30. On Sundays, hours were even more restricted, with evening opening delayed until 7 o'clock. The cry of time, "Gentlemen, please," echoed through British pubs every single night. 10 minutes before closing, the landlord would ring a brass bell and shout the warning. You'd have those final minutes to finish your drink, and by law, the pub had to be empty by closing time. Police officers would actually walk beach checking for lock-ins. Entertainment in 1950s pubs was a far cry from today's pub quizzes and slot machines. You might find a dartboard on the wall, or perhaps a bar billiards table tucked in the corner. Many pubs had a piano, and Saturday nights would see impromptu sing-songs. Everyone knew the words to the old music hall songs. Food was virtually non-existent. If you were lucky, you might get a pickled egg from a large jar on a bar, or perhaps a packet of Smith's crisps with the little blue salt packet twisted inside. The idea of a pub serving full meals was almost unthinkable. Pubs were for drinking, not eating. The brewery tie system dominated the industry completely. Nearly every pub was owned by a brewery and could only sell that brewery's products. Base, Watney's, Whitbread, and in co-op control vast estates of tied houses. Independent free houses were increasingly rare, swallowed up by the big brewers throughout the decade. This was also the era of the outdoor off-license hatch. Many pubs had a small window that opened onto the street where customers could buy bottles to take away. Working-class families would send children to the jug and bottle entrance with a jug, which would be filled directly from the barrel. The social rules were unspoken but absolutely rigid. You didn't sit at another man's regular seat. You bought around when it was your turn, without fail. You didn't discuss politics or religion. And you certainly didn't cause trouble, because the landlord would bar you for life, and everyone in the neighborhood would know about it. Hash the truth about British pubs in the 1950s, Part 2. The pub games of the 1950s created their own rituals and hierarchies. Darts wasn't just thrown casually at a board. It was serious business, with pub teams competing in leagues that mattered as much as football to the men who played. Every Thursday night, rival pubs would face off in matches that drew crowds of spectators. Jeff halfpenny tables occupied prime positions in many public bars. You'd see men hunched over these polished wooden boards, sliding old halfpenny coins up the surface with the base of their hand. The best players developed calluses from years of practice. Competitions could last hours, with small bets placed on the outcome. Cribbage players gathered in corners, their boards laid out on beer-stained tables. The click of pegs moving around the board provided a steady rhythm to the evening. These card games had been played in British pubs for centuries, and the 1950s players followed exactly the same rules that grandfathers had used. Bar billiards was the king of pub games during this era. These beautiful tables, imported from Belgium, featured mushroom-shaped skittles and holes with different point values. You'd feed a shilling into the slot, and the balls would roll down for your game. Hit the red-topped skittle and you'd lose all your points instantly. The dominoes players were perhaps the most dedicated of all. Their games produced a distinctive clicking sound as ivory pieces hit the wooden tables. In working men's clubs and northern pubs especially, dominoes tournaments drew intense concentration. Money changed hands, though gambling remained technically illegal in licensed premises. The relationship between pub and community extended far beyond the drinking. Many pubs served as unofficial post offices, with the landlord holding letters for customers. If someone needed to leave a message for a neighbor, they'd leave it at the pub. The landlord knew who'd be in and when. Pub outings were major events in the social calendar. Once or twice a year, the entire pub would hire a charabanc and head to the seaside. Southend, Margate, Blackpool, Brighton. Everyone would pile onto the coach, crates of beer loaded underneath, and spend the day drinking and paddling in the sea before the long journey home. Christmas clubs operated from most pubs throughout the year. You'd pay a few shillings each week, and come December, you'd have enough saved for presents and the Christmas dinner. The publican kept a careful ledger, recording every payment. It was a form of saving for people who didn't trust banks. The arrival of television in pubs came slowly during the late 1950s. The coronation in 1953 prompted some enterprising landlords to install sets, and their pubs were packed to the rafters. But many publicans resisted. They believed television would kill conversation. They weren't entirely wrong about their concern. By 1959, more pubs were installing television sets, particularly for sporting events. The small screen, perched high in the corner, would draw crowds for FA Cup finals or boxing matches. Everyone stood watching in silence, pints held steady. These were communal viewing experiences that made strangers feel like family. The pub hierarchy extended to the staff as well. The barmaid occupied a special position in pub culture. She was expected to be friendly, but not too friendly, attractive, but respectable. Barmaids developed thick skins dealing with comments and advances, but a good landlord would intervene if anyone stepped over the line. Cellar work was a skilled trade that took years to master. The cellarman rose early to tend the barrels, tapping new ones, checking temperatures, cleaning the lines. The quality of the beer depended entirely on his expertise. A pub with a good cellarman built a reputation that spread for miles around. The tight house system meant decoration and refurbishment followed strict brewery guidelines. Watney's pubs looked like Watney's pubs, with their distinctive signage and colour schemes. These houses had their red triangle prominently displayed. Walking down any high street, you could identify the brewery from the building's appearance alone. Modernization began creeping into some pubs as the decade progressed. The younger, more ambitious publicans started knocking through the partition walls between bars. This horrified traditionalists who believed the different classes should remain separate. But change was coming, however slowly. Keg beer emerged in the late 1950s, and it divided opinion like nothing else. Watney's Red Barrel, delivered in pressurized kegs rather than traditional casks, was easier to handle and lasted longer. It was also pasteurized, filtered, and served colder than traditional beer. Purists declared it an abomination, while brewers saw the future. The working men's clubs operated slightly differently from pubs, though they served similar functions. Members-only clubs, particularly strong in mining and industrial areas, often had better facilities than pubs. They could stay open later, offer cheaper beer, and host concerts and entertainment. But you needed membership, and they maintained strict political affiliations. Pub landlords often came from working-class backgrounds themselves, having saved for years to take on a tenancy. The brewery owned the building and charged rent, but running the pub was your responsibility. Make a success of it, and you could earn a decent living. Fail, and you'd be out with another hopeful family moving into the accommodation above. The accommodation itself was basic by modern standards. Most pub landladies lived upstairs in cramped quarters with their families. Privacy was minimal. You could hear the noise from the bar below every night. The smell of beer and smoke permeated everything you owned. As the 1950s drew to a close, subtle changes were beginning to reshape pub culture. Younger drinkers questioned the old divisions and restrictions. The post-war generation wanted something different, something less formal. The 1960s would bring transformation, but in 1959, the traditional British pub still reigned supreme, institution that seemed as permanent as the buildings themselves.